we're going to be working with tofu. Recently, a friend of mine texted me wondering if I had any ideas for her brunch menu items. She had just invited a group of people over, and turned out a few of them were vegans, and she wanted some suggestions. And so I sent her a couple of my favorite recipes, one of which I'm going to show you today. But what's interesting to me is sometimes when people are just learning to cook with tofu, they're intimidated by it. And what I want to say is, don't be afraid. Don't be afraid of tofu. It's actually very friendly and very, very forgiving. There's not a lot you can do to wreck it. It's a real straightforward, kind of almost like a flavor sponge, if you will. Whatever you put on tofu is what it's going to taste like. It's going to absorb flavors, and it's one of the reasons why a lot of people use tofu not only for savory dishes, but also for desserts. What we're going to be making today is a tofu scramble. Very much like scrambled eggs, but using tofu instead. I'm using a product that I'm not familiar with. I'm trying a brand new tofu this time around. But tofu is typically packaged in water. So one of the first things you want to know when you're working with tofu is you need to drain the water out of the packaging, out of the tofu, because if you really want tofu to absorb flavor, the less water, the better it is. There's a few different ways you can do that. One is probably, one of the simplest, easy way to go about doing it, but not necessarily the most environmentally friendly, and that is just using layers of paper towels and sandwiching your tofu between the paper towel. Cut it in half, make it a little bit thinner. There we go. Put that like that. Then I'll add a few more layers of paper towels on top, and take a cutting board and just press down, nice and firm. Put your weight on it. Since we're going to be making a scramble, you can smash this stuff. It can get really mushy because we're going to end up breaking it up anyway. So let's see how that did. You can see a lot of water came out of it. I could probably stand to do it one more time, but I prefer not to use paper towels because you can go through a lot of them in the process of doing that. You could use a really clean dish towel. Another method that you can use to get the water out of tofu is just sandwich a slab of tofu between a couple of plates and just squeeze it. I think we've already gotten quite a bit of water out of this one, so we're not getting a lot. There we go. I like using a tofu press, and there's lots of different versions of tofu presses. This one is very basic. It's just got a couple of these big old screws. You put your piece of tofu inside the press and just dial it back down really, really tight. And as you tighten it, you can see it really gets all that extra water out. So whatever method you use, just know the more water you get out of the tofu, the more flavor your tofu is going to absorb when you're cooking it. Okay, so we've got most of the water, as much as we can, drained out of the tofu, and next thing we're going to do is just break it up into pieces. You can use a fork. I like using a larger fork. This is actually a kind of a serving fork, but I like it because it's got the wide tines on it, and I can really get in there and kind of just break up this tofu. So we're just kind of breaking it up, almost if you can imagine cooked eggs. Kind of that consistency, that texture that it would have when you have scrambled eggs. Something you're going to find when you're using tofu is, depending on the brand that you use, there's not a lot of consistency in textures. So what one brand shows as a firm or an extra firm may be very soft or almost a medium firm compared to another brand. When you're making scramble, you really want something that's more into a medium firm, where it's not dry in texture, but you also don't want it so soft or silken, as it's sometimes referred to, that it's just going to turn into almost a pudding consistency. You need it to hold together, but you want it to be soft. Imagine like scrambled eggs. So we've got the tofu all broken up. The next step, and this is so simple, is we're going to put together the flavoring. It's almost like a marinade, if you will. Half a cup of water, just fresh water, a 1/4 teaspoon of cumin. It's kind of almost a scant 1/4 teaspoon. I don't like to use too much cumin because it can have kind of a pretty strong flavor. And with 1 full package of tofu, and that's what I'm doing. I use both those little individual packages together. For 1 package of tofu, this is how much you want to use. We're also going to use a 1/4 teaspoon of turmeric. Turmeric is what really adds the color to the scramble, gives it that very similar to a scrambled egg look. And then there's a secret ingredient that I use, and it's known as Himalayan black salt, also known as Namak, K-A-L-A-N-A-M-A-K. It is a pinkish colored salt that comes from India and the Himalayas. Do not confuse it with Himalayan pink salt. And what I've done is I put together here an example for you of the 2 salts side by side. This is Himalayan pink salt. This is the really common salt you see all the time in your grocery store. A lot of people use this. Even you see the salt blocks. They even make lamps out of it. That's Himalayan pink salt. This is Himalayan black salt. Also very pinkish in color, but it's more muted. It's kind of a gray color. The consistency is different also. Pink salt is very granulated, just like table salt. Black salt is almost like baking soda. It's kind of a powdery, lumpy consistency. It has naturally occurring sulfur in it, and it smells, if you could smell this right now, it's like I've got a plate of hard-boiled eggs. So now we're going to take this over to the stove, and we're going to start cooking. I just added 3 tablespoons of extra virgin olive oil to my pan. I've got the heat on high, so I want to really get that oil up to heat before I put the tofu in it. I like to use cast iron. This particular pan has been together with my husband and I as long as we have. We bought this, it was probably our very first piece of cookware that we purchased as a couple, and cast iron will last for generations if you take good care of it. Nice thing about iron too, particularly for vegans, is every time you cook in it, it imparts iron into your food, and so you kind of increase your minerals by cooking in cast iron. Don't be nervous about cooking with tofu. It is really, really, really forgiving. There's really not much you can do to mess it up. It can handle pretty high heat. It's already pre-cooked, so you can eat it raw. So you don't have to worry about whether you've cooked it long enough. I'm now going to add our combination of the turmeric and the cumin and the Himalayan black salt. Just kind of work it around in there. You see it already starting to change color. It's taking on that beautiful gold color of the turmeric, which also, by the way, has a lot of beneficial, helpful vitamins and nutrients in it. Once all of the liquid is cooked off of the tofu, it takes about 10-15 minutes. We turn the heat off and then it's ready to serve. So while that is cooking, now we're going to start preparing all the extras that are going to go with this. So while the tofu is cooking and all that liquid is cooking off, is the perfect time to then prepare all the little goodies that we're going to have to go along with the scramble. So what I like to do is very much like what my mom used to serve when I was a kid growing up on Sundays. Typically would be when we would have like a real family sit-down breakfast. And so my mom would do, similar to like an omelet bar, she'd do a scrambled egg bar. So she'd do a big batch of scrambled eggs, and then along with that we would have everything from like diced tomatoes and grated cheese and bacon bits and various things that we could then add as toppings onto our scrambled eggs. So that's what I like to do with the tofu scramble. And one of the things, of course, it just seems like a natural to go with it, is avocado. So while the tofu is cooking, that's when I typically will prepare all of the various add-ons, toppings that I'm going to have with the scramble. And we're fortunate here in California, typically avocados are in season almost any time of the year. So to me, any time's a good time for avocado. I can just eat avocado plain. Or for me, perfection is avocado with a little lime juice and salt squeezed on it. I could make a meal out of that. So I'm going to put a little avocado in here. If you need to prepare any of this in advance, which I typically do, I'll usually do the avocado last because avocado has a tendency of turning brown. Once the air touches it, it oxidizes and it'll start getting a little of that rust color on it. And a way to keep that from happening is by squeezing a little lime juice on it, or lemon. If you don't have lime, lemon works too. But it really helps slow down that oxidation and keeps it from browning. And it adds some flavor to it as well. So I'm gonna go put this on my table. I'm gonna go see how the tofu's doing, and I'll see you in the dining room. Brunch is served, everybody. What I've done here is I've just put together just kind of some ideas of the kinds of things that you can use when you set up your scramble bar, if you will. I've got some avocado, olives, tomatoes. I love artichoke hearts, so I've got some artichoke hearts. You can have fresh spinach, mushrooms. You can get the soy bako bits. You can pretty much add whatever you want. I also usually like to have an assortment of different salsas and hot sauces. My husband's crazy about green Tabasco. We normally have that. I would say this entire meal from start to finish with preparation took maybe a half an hour. If you have guests staying over at your house, this is a really easy way to prepare a nice brunch for everybody to enjoy. I would typically also probably do a batch of rosemary potatoes, depending on how many people, and if I got grandkids or kids around, I would probably do waffles or pancakes. Use your imagination, have whatever you want. I also like to do a little fruit. We've got yogurt, so you can have a variety of different flavors of yogurts. The yogurt I'm using is a coconut-based yogurt by So Delicious. I really like their yogurts, but there's also a lot of other fantastic brands of yogurts that are nut-based, and I'm gonna have a little fresh fruit and dried fruit. Here's some yogurt, go with it. Toast. And there we go. A really healthy, quick, easy, and I think rather exciting looking breakfast. Hey, thanks for watching, and if you enjoyed what you saw today, please subscribe to the Carrot Underground on YouTube. If you hear chirping in the background, that's my little friend Bill, the Wonder Bird. He's a cockatiel that literally flew into our lives about 17 years ago when we found him in a palm tree in front of our house.